for being here. You know, it is this is a great time for a lot of fourth year medical students and even previous, earlier programs, earlier students who are thinking about applying to residency, just to kind of get a good understanding of the personal statement. Dr. Lee is somebody who is at GW, who is a leader in, the educational opportunities that we are afforded, especially going into surgery, which is something that I am. So when I was thinking about creating this webinar, I had heard Dr. Lee give some feedback on personal statements, and she is, an English major from that. I hope she talks about a little bit. So she has a great understanding of how to develop a personal statement, how to present yourself, and she was the obvious choice for this. She's been a mentor for me at GW in the field of surgery, as I am, now progressing into. I'm currently in Chicago right now. I actually just got off call. That's the reason why I'm a little bit late. So I just can't thank Dr. Lee enough for being here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lee. So thank you so much.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session on writing a personal statement. As Nick said, I am a general surgery faculty member at George Washington University, and I've been here on faculty now. This July is the start of my 21st year on faculty and the start of my 28th year at GW, including my residency training, which included a couple of years of research. So that's why it's quite a long time there. As Nick says, I'm heavily involved in education at GW, having taken on multiple roles in graduate medical education, residency training, as well as undergraduate education. And so at this point, from my main focus from an education standpoint is focused more on the undergraduate medical education, medical student roles, and a great involvement in this transition period for you all as you go on to your residency training. I started this personal statement writing workshop for the GW students many years ago because I felt it was something that was quite needed. And one thing that Nick mentioned is that I was an English major as an undergrad. I was also a chemistry major, so I sort of did a little bit of both. But the English major side of me is what sort of brought this to the fore, because you all as medical students have probably been engaged in scientific writing, which is probably what you are more comfortable with right now, but your personal statements are more expository writing. So it's something that, unless you continue to enjoy writing in that vein, probably have not engaged in quite some time. Probably the last time you wrote something like this was to get into medical school. And then it's a very difficult topic to talk about. It's hard to write something about yourself without sounding a bit stiff or trite, a little too saccharine, not sure how. And so it's hard to be very positive about yourself without sounding too typical, and you want to be unique, but not so unique. When I think about a personal statement, when I'm reading applications, I believe it's an opportunity for you to say something that's not in your application. Your reviewers for your residency application, as well as faculty and residents who will be interviewing you, will have all of your data available that's going to be in your ERAS application. That includes all of your formal examinations, your letters of recommendation, things of that sort. And this is an opportunity to really sound like yourself and to speak like yourself without actually talking to someone. So it's a way to get to know you a little bit. And when you write something, it's putting your own self out there and giving an idea of your own perspective. So I think that it's important to be creative and thoughtful about what you want to write, but not so creative that it borders on something that seems a little weird. People just don't know you, so you have to just be mindful that they may not understand you right away. I think it's important for you to really catch someone's attention right away, to have some type of hook or a link that someone can identify with, so they feel interested in reading further and intrigued by what they find. So with any type of writing, I think it's important to know who your audience is. And your audience includes program directors, chairs of the departments that you're of the specialties you're pursuing, faculty and residents. I've recommended that you try to keep it to no more than 1 page and to use a font size no smaller than 10. Part of that is to force you to edit your thoughts and to be very specific about what you want to say. But I think more importantly, it's also the logistics of how it appears for your readers on ERAS. So just so you know, when we look at it, if the font is too small, then we have to enlarge it on our computer screens. And then it's actually very hard for us to read because we have to slide the cursor back and forth from the left half of the page and the right half of the page. And it seemed to work out best for those logistics and formatting. So it's I think it's an editorial recommendation as well as a practical recommendation. So those are just some general thoughts I have. Other things that you want to think about is to have people who you trust read your personal statement. So, and perhaps also have people who may know you very well and people who don't know you as well. Because if you know the writer very well, you may make assumptions about what you think is coming across. So if I were reading Nick's personal statement, I have to be very careful that I'm not biasing my feedback to him based on my closer relationship to him versus someone who I don't know as well, who may have to be very explicit about what they want to say. So I have to make sure on both sides I'm giving balanced feedback. You also have to recognize that you have to write a lot of drafts and your first draft won't be very good, and that's okay. We expect that. And you should expect that as well. So be prepared to throw out entire sections, the entire statement perhaps, and start all over again. So one of my English professors used to say, write without fear and edit without mercy. So when you're thinking about putting down your thoughts, just start writing, just start putting down ideas and worry about how to express yourself precisely the way you want to and how you want to edit your statement later after you just put some thoughts down. So all of these years of reading personal statements, I have come up with basically these 6 cliche statements that I see over and over again. And it's my recommendation to you that you try to limit yourself or try not to fall into these little traps, because as someone who's reading multiple hundreds of personal statements every interview season, it gets a little boring, frankly. And so they start out like this, that ever since I was born, or for years and years, I've wanted to be fill in the blank specialty, a surgeon, an internist, a pediatrician, what have you. Then we have the opposite situation where you never thought that you wanted to go into surgery, but your experience on your clerkship changed your mind. Oftentimes we'll hear stories about how a family member or a friend or even yourself had a medical or surgical problem, and your interactions with this amazing internist, cardiologist, whatever specialty just made such an impact in your life, and it made you want to pursue that. Sometimes people start with quotes. Sometimes the quote itself is sort of just dangling there, and I'm not sure how to interpret the quote or how they're using it. Sometimes they start with a patient's story. And so that sometimes, in my opinion, shifts the focus away from you. So it becomes less of a personal statement and more a statement about your patient themselves. I've also seen a variation of this theme, which is some stories about friends or family members who were particularly impactful in your life. As an example, one of my former students many years ago wrote a personal statement about the influence of his father and brother on his life. And so the first 2 paragraphs of the personal statement were about the father and the brother, and I did not hear about the student until paragraph 3. So the feedback I gave to that student was, this opening introduction would have been a great first chapter of the book about your family, and you're getting exposed to all the different characters that I'm going to hear more about through the rest of the novel or biography. But you have one page to start talking about yourself, and I didn't hear about the student till paragraph 3. So I thought that was a little bit too late into the narrative. And then finally, which from an English perspective, which I think is the most immature type of comparison, is the simile, which is blank is like blank. So the first blank is the specialty choice, and it's like something else that you're comparing it to. So I've heard things such as surgery is like being the captain of my basketball team, or medicine is like mountain climbing and overcoming obstacles, things of that sort that I've seen quite a bit. So what I recommend in terms of tips for writing a personal statement is that I want you to think about what you want someone to come away with when they read the statement. What is the focus and the theme that you want them to know about you? And I would recommend a maximum of 3 themes. And so when you're explaining these themes, they should be unique to you. It doesn't mean that's unique in the whole realm of possibilities, but unique to you, specific to you, that you have a particular passion and knowledge within that particular subject area. And you can really sustain that thought throughout the whole statement. You can then give examples of things that highlight your theme or support what you're trying to say. And just make sure that when you're concluding your personal statement, it really talks a little bit about your growth and your evolution and maybe what you've learned throughout that process. I think it's also important to make sure that when you're writing that your transitions are logical and strong. Otherwise, you're sort of left hanging on one end, and then it's an abrupt, non-related transition, and it's just hard to really understand how you got from one point to the other. So when you follow through with something, just be sure that you are really expressing what it is that you mean. Don't assume that the reader knows what you're trying to say, so be a little bit more explicit. Avoid commentary on general subjects. Make sure that you check grammar and spelling. So when you feel that you have secured and you've expressed your themes the way that you want to, then make sure that your grammar and your spelling are tight. Those are things that you have complete control over. Be mindful of fragments and run-on sentences. Make sure that your verb tense is in agreement throughout your statement, and try to minimize contractions and abbreviations. I also think that you have to just express what it is that you want to say about yourself, not what you assume someone wants to hear. I also don't recommend that you rewrite your CV in a prose form. We have that available to review in all the different sections of the ERAS application. Certain controversial topics may be a little bit challenging to write about. Now, we've seen a lot of things in the press recently with how the political climate and some of the cultural things in our society are affecting medicine. I think that those things are reasonable to talk about. We have a role in things like anti-racism and gun control and abortion rights and things of that sort. So speak about the perspective of a physician in that role. And I think those are good, but just be mindful that people have very different opinions and you just don't know how they may react to them. Try not to emphasize negative things. Over the years, I've also told students that sometimes you can use the personal statement as an opportunity to address what you feel is a blemish in your applications. For example, if you did not score as high as you wanted to on your part 1 of your USMLE, or if you had a little hiccup in a class in medical school. I think it's reasonable to address it, but don't belabor the point. Don't make something that is a small little blemish in your application into something much larger. So talk a little bit more about how you learned from that opportunity versus just the point itself that you had to repeat a class or something of that sort. It's good to have a sense of humor. But if you try to be too funny, sometimes people don't appreciate actually what your joke is. So just be mindful that that you may not reach everyone with what you're trying to say. So these are some of the questions that I have posed to some of the students at GW to think about. How can you start thinking what to include? How do I start writing? Just as a way of brainstorming ideas and thinking about details that may be important to you. So things such as that make you unique or different. What attracts you to the specialty and what do you hope to get out of it? Talk a little bit about how you developed your interest within your particular specialty and some of the things that influenced you intellectually throughout your education. Are there specific medical school experiences that you think have uniquely prepared you for residency training and those academic accomplishments that highlight that? Other things that you might want to talk about are things that you're proud of. It's good to toot your own horn because you are your own best advocate in this process. I would just tell you that sometimes it is difficult from a cultural standpoint for some people to express a certain pride in what they've done and their accomplishments. It sometimes is gender-based as well. I will tell you from my standpoint, I'm Chinese, and I grew up with a father who used to say, if you do the right thing, then you don't have to talk about yourself, other people will talk about you. And it just goes to a little bit of his humble nature and modesty, which is what he wanted his children to adopt a little bit. And I think that in some ways that's good. And I have also learned that in a more Western environment that sometimes you do have to toot your own horn because you have to highlight things that you are prepared for. If, let's say, there was an opportunity that I wanted to put myself up for, I have to highlight why I'm qualified for it. They want to know that I'm capable of doing the job, just as you are trying to tell the program directors and the chairs and the others who are looking at your application that you are prepared and ready to take on your new residency role. Most of the programs or many of the programs that you'll be applying to are academic in nature. And even some of the academic affiliated programs and some of the community-based programs are interested in other things that you've done outside of your academics, which could include your research, other things that you're proud of. So Nick should talk about his role with the MSDC and being an advocate and as someone who is trying to share his education and his learning at GW with his colleagues throughout the city. If you've done other things that have been of service to your community, and that community can include your specialty community, it can include your medical school community, it can be your neighborhood societal community, things of that nature. And is there something that you want to express that if a faculty member who you trust and respect would be impressed if they read this in your personal statement? So these are just some inventory ideas for you. There are many, many more, and I've just given you just some examples just to, just to stimulate your mind a little bit on what you can think of. So when you're writing, what you're doing tonight is starting the pre-writing process. You are brainstorming some ideas. I've given you some outlines on how to perhaps get started. And if you are already fourth years, you should really be getting a rough draft already. It's July 26th now. The applications are going to be in about 6-ish weeks or so. And at the same time that you're trying to get all of your data together for your application, you're also doing the other things that are going to make your process as streamlined as possible, which is going on acting internships and visiting other programs. And so there's a lot of other work that you're doing in addition to getting your application together. So you need to do a little bit every day. And you need to get a rough draft down. Like I said, it's not going to be perfect, but just start getting some ideas down and you will feel a little bit of calm and relief that you've started the process and you're thinking about things. Then you want to really take time to really edit as much as possible. So your ideas are as you want them. You want to make sure that the statement is really accomplishing the goal, which is to present your best the best picture of yourself forward, and make sure it's organized in a way that is logical and tells a story about you. Then it's going to be fine tuning things, really polishing it and making it the best personal statement you can be, and then getting it quote unquote published. So publishing as in reporting it to ERAS and then allowing the mailbox to open so the program directors and the chairs and all the faculty can start looking at your application. So I would recommend that you work on steps 1 and 2, as I said here, pre-writing, brainstorming, getting your ideas down and starting a rough draft. So how do you do that? Pick a couple of the inventory questions that I gave you and just write it down. And we might even in today, somebody might feel brave enough to just to talk about what they are interested in expressing. Or write down a couple of themes that you want someone to know about you. What are the things that if someone walked away and said, okay, this is who Juliette Lee is. She's this kind of surgeon, or she has a focus in education, things of that sort. Think about, even if you don't do for each particular theme, think about some examples that you might use to support your ideas, or even try to just get a first paragraph down. So you really want to just take this session and get right on it, because if you even let too much time pass from here, this will be a memory for you in a very short order as other life things get in the way. So as I said, steps 2 through 5 are making sure that you continue to work on getting it done. So this was the timeline that I suggested to the GW students, so that by June and July, which is sort of where we are, we've already written it and we've already gotten a first round of feedback. And so you really want to make sure that you have the opportunity to also step away from reading it. If any of you have ever written manuscripts, essays, anything at all, you don't have a lot of perspective if you don't give it time away from some statements. And so I usually tell students, write it, feel pretty confident, and then put it away, come back to it a week or so later, a couple of weeks later, and reread it. Make sure that it's still sounding exactly as you wanted to say. Does it represent who you are? And again, get some peer or advisor or mentor feedback. And then around September 15th or so, I think the mailbox actually opens a little bit later this year. I think it's the 20-something this year. But usually by mid-September, I like to tell our students, at least at GW, get most of your things ready to go, because you just never know which programs are going to be so proactive and start opening up applications right away. So you want your application to be as complete and as thorough as it possibly can. Okay. And so, Pia, if you could actually hold recording for a moment,